Before you ask, words from the earth, land dwellers, sea rovers, tillers, spelunkers. Before you ask the questions many ask, have asked since man first appeared here, or may in time dawn in your mind, or form on the lips of your fellow creatures, about me. Look from heart and root across this place, at this oasis, into this whole intelligence I offer you freely, share with you generously, and you might then sense the answers, might well see, feel, and receive your answers. Welcome, and thank you for leaning in to the latest floating poetry broadcast, the 50th in my ongoing weekly series. Coming to you live on the coast of Rhode Island, newly tonight and for April from Shelter Harbor, whose streets are named after famous composers. Here as we speak on Gounod, between Brahms and Grieg, Johannes and Edvard, near the now sleeping salt pond of Quananchatoag. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully, and tonight and always more earthily. Last week, we immersed ourselves in the wonder and wisdom of the sea. This week, I'm inviting you to be in touch, to stay in touch with the earth, with the Gaia, this great oasis, our one and only home, ever-giving source of sustenance, literally, of resonance, lyrically, of consciousness, planetarily. Knowing how essential it is, and can be, on myriad levels, I felt we ought to bring our mindfulness and heartfulness to it here, and also our reverence, and actively attune ourselves to it daily as we can, remind ourselves to continue or ideally add to and not lose, never lose our vital connection to this earth we share. So here, for you, for us all, a choreography of cultural commentary, poetry, thoughts, and inquiries that I hope speaks to you and affirms or expands your relationship with the supremely sentient earth. Well, let's take a moment to breathe in, just to breathe. There's lots of reasons people are holding their breaths still these days, but a moment to breathe, and to breathe in, and to breathe with the spring of the earth, as I'm doing, at least in this part of the world. With this poem from my Walden Pond, I call it Kitchell Pond in Morristown, New Jersey, a few Aprils back, since we're on the cusp of April. It's called Sweet Air. Of country spring, now flowering trees, newly cut grass, the earth, breathing out again. And from Berlin, from Germany, one blossoming spring I was there, came this effusion in March of 2015 on Lichterfelde Öst in Berlin, A Morning on Earth. It's an early spring morning of bell song and bird song, sun song and crocus song, tree song, green song, Erdenlied. Here's one more about the earth that as an energy of awakening, of renewing. So maybe sip this with me. It's called The First Sip of Spring. Imagine taking that in a big gourd or cup. Gourd, I think, would be the right thing. The first sip of spring. I emerge from a deep hole in the ground, and my overwintered buds are surprised by the first sip of spring, by a fresh in-breath of daffodiled and crocused air, the perfume of primavera arising from the park. I pause to drink and remember it's time for me to bloom. Well, in my researching of things that I'm interested in discovering, and I'm hoping you are is this idea of the consciousness of the intelligence of the earth itself, the rising awareness among many who were less aware about it, about that consciousness. And I drew this from Cosmos. It's a journal for global transformation, and it's about the rising earth consciousness and awareness. It was published back in the spring of 2019. And here's the excerpt I thought was interesting for us. Earth is consciousness. Nothing in nature is void of it, not even the rocks. All natural states, all sentient beings, and all forms of Earth's life derive awareness from this unique and vital form of Earth consciousness. It embodies countless expressions of interdependence among all the elements of life: earth, wind, space, water, and fire, all forms of living species, animals, birds, forests, grasses, soils, insects, flowers, fruits, and water bodies, and all nature's kingdoms, such as the mineral kingdom. When left alone, all the many forms of interdependence are in perfect balance. We cannot be unequal, quote, partners with nature. We must make peace with all expressions of nature. Here. Well, on that note, I was thinking, of course, about the great lovers of, believers of, preservers of, protectors and reverers of nature. And Mother Earth is the Native Americans. And I came across this from Daedalus, which is a publication of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences back in fall of 2001 on Indigenous Americans, Spirituality and Ecos. It was by a Professor Jack Forbes, Professor Emeritus, former chair of Native American Studies at the University of California at Davis. He said perhaps the most important aspect of indigenous cosmic visions is the conception of creation as a living process, resulting in a living universe in which a kinship exists between all things. Here's an ancient Zuni prayer song. That our Earth Mother may wrap herself in a fourfold robe of white meal, which is snow. When our Earth Mother is replete with living waters, when spring comes, the source of our flesh, all the different kinds of corn, we shall lay to rest in the ground with the Earth's Mother living waters. They will be made into new beings, coming out standing into the daylight of their Son, Father. To all sides, they will stretch out their hands. Thus the Mother Earth is a living being, as are the waters and the sun. Juan Matus told Carlos Castaneda that Gennaro e Mazzatecol was, quote, just now embracing this enormous earth, but the earth knows that Gennaro loves it, and it bestows on him its care. This earth, this world. For a warrior, there can be no greater love. This lovely being, which is alive to its last recesses and understands every feeling. Or, as Lame Deer puts it, we must try to use the pipe for mankind, which is on the road to self-destruction. This can be done only if all of us, Indians and non-Indians alike, can again see ourselves as part of the earth, not as an enemy from the outside who tries to impose its will on it, because we also know that, being a living part of the earth, we cannot harm any part of her without hurting ourselves. Well, as the professor writes, European writers long ago referred to indigenous Americans as, quote, ways as animism. That means lifeism. And it is true that most or perhaps all Native Americans see the entire universe as being alive, that is, as having movement and an ability to act. But more than that, indigenous Americans tend to see this living world as a fantastic and beautiful creation, engendering extremely powerful feelings of gratitude and indebtedness, obliging us to behave as if we are related to one another. An overriding characteristic of all Native North American traditions is that of gratitude. of overwhelming love and thankfulness for the gifts of the Creator and the earth. As Joshua Wetsit and Asin Nabani, elder born in 1886, put it, but our Indian religion is all one religion, the Great Spirit. We're thankful that we're on this Mother Earth. That's the first thing. When we wake up in the morning, it is to be thankful to the Great Spirit for the Mother Earth, how we live, what it produces, what keeps everything alive. Even the water I'm drinking, of course, comes from the earth. So just that simple thing alone, right? We couldn't live without that. And yet I don't think most of us think about the fact that it's vital and comes from our beautiful earth. Henry Beston, who I've spoken of at other programs from his book Northern Farm, with an eye on how harvest season illuminates our relationship to the earth and to ourselves. How wise were the ancients who never lost sight of the religious significance of the earth. They used the land to the full, draining, plowing, and manuring every inch, but their use was not an attack on its nature, nor was the ancient motherhood of earth ever forgotten in the breaking and preparing of the soil. Well, I was thinking of that, and I was thinking of indigenous people of other kinds and their deep care for the earth, and I composed this poem one spring in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, a few years back, about the people of the Andes. It's called Altiplano, which is an altitude where they do this for tens of thousands of years, 12,000 feet above sea level, on the cold shoulders of the Andes. Wild tubers have thrived through strong winds, poor soil, bone-chilling temperatures. The earliest ancestors of the ubiquitous potato we know en masse, on starch, on our plates today. But a far cry in shape, color, taste. Nativeness from the dozens of varieties nimble Andean farmers learned over millennia to cultivate in their terraced altiplano gardens, from orange to black, marble to soccer ball size. To read about wonders like this, the tenacity, variety, wild nonconformity of these crops, is to muse on what has been learned or leached out as a culture, an agriculture. What naturally wise ways have been lost, forgotten, that the mountain, Chilean, and Peruvian farmers still preserve, still remember, high above the world. The marvelous naturalist, some of you may know John Muir, wrote this: one is constantly reminded of the infinite lavishness and fertility of nature, inexhaustible abundance amid what seems enormous waste. And yet when we look into any of her operations that lie within reach of our minds, we learn that no particle of her material is wasted or worn out. It is eternally flowing from use to use, beauty to yet higher beauty, and we soon cease to lament waste and death, and rather rejoice and exult in the imperishable, unspendable wealth of the earth, and faithfully watch and wait the reappearance of everything that melts and fades and dies about us, feeling sure that its next appearance will be better and more beautiful than the last. More and more, in a place like this, which, by the way, was eastern Yosemite in the late 1800s, more and more in a place like this, we feel ourselves part of wild nature, kin to everything. Thank you, John Muir, for so much. The nature writer, also back in time, around that time, his name was Richard Jeffries, on the Pageant of Summer wrote, every blade of grass, each leaf, each separate florid and petal is an inscription speaking of hope. My heart is fixed firm and stable in the belief that ultimately the sunshine in the summer, the flowers in the azure sky, shall become as it were interwoven into man's existence. He shall take from all their beauty and enjoy their glory. Hence it is that a flower is to me so much more than stalk and petals. Well, I've mentioned, I've been reading Greg Lavoie's a very inspiring book, Callings. And he also had a talk I looked up on YouTube, and he spoke about the same that he wrote about in the book, same experience of growing up and about his father and his brother and there was a game that they played, the father created, and I love this, and I maybe encourage us to play this kind of game or with our children or grandchildren, those who have them. So this is a chapter on making pilgrimage, where he said, my father's favorite game to play with my two brothers and me when we were children was something he called the alien game, in which he was a visitor from another planet, and we were his guides here on Earth. He would point into the sky, for instance, and ask, what are those formations that move through the atmosphere? Clouds, we'd say with great confidence. Clouds? What are they made of? Water, we'd all say at once. How does the water get up there, he'd inquire, and what holds it up, and why does it move? In no time at all, it would become apparent to us earthlings that clouds weren't the only things that were over our heads. Entire afternoons could go by as we pondered the mysteries of water and wind, and how it's possible that we can know so much and understand so little, that we can live with something every day of our lives and never really come to know it. Well, that, as I hopscotch around in thought, that led me to the Lebanese-American poet, painter, and philosopher Etel Adnantin on time, self, and permanence and transcendence. It's a book she wrote called Journey to Mount Tamalpais. Some of you may have been on that mountain. Etel Adnan. So in Brain Pickings, they talk about her. She fell in love with Mount Tamalpais, the first vertebrae of the mountainous backbone of the Americas that stretches all the way to Tierra del Fuego. In its towering presence, she found herself, quote, left with the sort of wonder that the sense of eternity always carries with it, with a, quote, feeling of latent prophecy. The mountain became her abiding muse, which she celebrated and serenaded in a flood of paintings and poetic reverberations. Under Adnan's gaze, generous, penetrating, benedictory, the mountain becomes both metaphor and not metaphor, both object of reverent curiosity and sovereign subject, unbeholden to human interpretation. Here's what she wrote, an excerpt, a slice. Like a chorus, the warm breeze had come all the way from Athens and Baghdad to the bay, by the Pacific route, its longest journey. It is the energy of these winds that I used when I came to these shores, obsessed, followed by my homemade furies, Erinyes, and such potent creatures. And I fell in love with the immense blue eyes of the Pacific. I saw its red algae, its blood-colored cliffs, its pulsating breath. The ocean led me to the mountain. Once I was asked in front of a television camera, who is the most important person you ever met? And I remember answering, a mountain. I thus discovered that Tamalpais was at the very center of my being. Isn't that beautiful? Love that. Love discovering that and sharing that with you. Gary Snyder, the great wilderness writer and poet of long standing, who I've spoken of before, wrote this poem, speaking of mountains. It's called Meeting the Mountains. I think that was written back in 1970, actually. He crawls to the edge of the foaming creek. He backs up the slab ledge. He puts a finger in the water. He turns to a trapped pool, puts both hands in the water, puts one foot in the pool, drops pebbles in the pool. He slaps the water's surface with both hands. He cries out, rises up, and stands facing toward the torrent and the mountain, raises up both hands and shouts 3 times. Meeting the Mountains. That sparked me to think of Mark Strand's poem from his collection, Blizzard of One. And I love how this poem melds the body of the man, or a man, with the body of the earth. Might want to muse on that. It's called Old Man Leaves Party. It was clear when I left the party that though I was over 80, I still had a beautiful body. The moon shone down, as it will, on moments of deep introspection. The wind held its breath. And look, somebody left a mirror leaning against a tree. Making sure that I was alone, I took off my shirt. The flowers of bare grass nodded their moon-washed heads. I took off my pants, and the magpies circled the redwoods. Down in the valley, the creaking river was flowing once more. How strange that I should stand in the wilds alone with my body. I know what you were thinking. I was like you once. But now, with so much before me, so many emerald trees and weed-whitened fields, mountains and lakes, how could I not be only myself, this dream of flesh, from moment to moment? Thank you, Mark Strand. Well, just to think of the sensuality of the earth itself, sensuality alone, among other things, the beauty and energies, but the sensuality. And I was taken with a painting of a painter friend, Adam Van Doren, and this is a painting he did of the Lake District in England, and it inspired this poem, On a Deep Green Rise. I entered the painting and imagined myself being in the scene and what I was feeling. You hike with long legs up to a deep green rise, shirt unbuttoned to the sun, sleeves rolled, and stop to drink in the serene blue lake. Bathe in the lather of the country clouds, long, soft, gentle clouds, their undersides still warm from the day. You lie down, face, chest, palms to the sky. Let all the elements converge. There was a poem that I've been wanting to read, different programs, and tonight, finally, I think we can get to it. It's a Neruda poem, Pablo Neruda, and it's an ode to a forest, and the title is The Chilean Forest. So let's have it. Let's go there. Under the volcanoes, beside the snow-capped mountains, among the huge lakes, the fragrant, the silent, the tangled Chilean forest. My feet sink down into the dead leaves, a fragile twig crackles. The giant rowley trees rise in all their bristling height. A bird from the cold jungle passes over, flaps its wings, and stops in the sunless branches. And then, from its hideaway, it sings like an oboe. The wild scent of the laurel, the dark scent of the boldo herb, enter my nostrils and flood my whole being. The cypress of the Goitecas blocks my way. This is a vertical world, a nation of birds, a plenitude of leaves. I stumble over a rock, dig up the uncovered hollow. An enormous spider covered with red hair stares up at me, motionless, as huge as a crab. A golden carabus beetle blows its mephitic breath at me as its brilliant rainbow disappears like lightning. Going on, I pass through a forest of ferns much taller than I am. From their cold green eyes, 60 tears splash down on my face, and behind me, their fans go on quivering for a long time. A decaying tree trunk, what a treasure! Black and blue mushrooms have given it ears. Red parasite plants have covered it with rubies. Other lazy plants have let it borrow their beards, and a snake springs out of the rotted body like a sudden breath, as if the spirit of the dead trunk were slipping away from it. Farther along, each tree stands away from its fellows. They soar up over the carpet of the secretive forest, and the foliage of each has its own style, linear, bristling, ramulose, lanceolate, as if cut by shears moving in infinite ways. A gorge below, the crystal water slides over granite and jasper. A butterfly goes past, bright as a lemon, dancing between the water and the sunlight. Close by, innumerable calceolarias nod their little yellow heads in greeting. High up, red copihues dangle like drops from the magic forest's arteries. A fox cuts through the silence like a flash, sending a shiver through the leaves, but silence is the law of the plant kingdom. The barely audible cry of some bewildered animal far off, the piercing interruption of a hidden bird. The vegetable world keeps up its low rustle until a storm chums up all the music of the earth. anyone who hasn't been in a Chilean forest doesn't know this planet. I have come out of that landscape, that mud, that silence, to roam, to go singing through the world. Thank you, Pablo Neruda. Well, everywhere around us is some part of the earth that's alive, that's emanating something vital, something beautiful, something natural. And Mary Oliver, beloved poet, speaks to this in this poem, When I Am Among the Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I'm so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Thank you, Mary Oliver. Here's one of many odes to trees and their spirits of mine. It was written back in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, Western Mass, Sunnybrook, the home of very dear friends, one of them no longer around, very dear soul brother, several years gone, much missed, Murray Bruce. This was in June of 1999, a while back. It's called Three Green Graces. This was as I looked at the orchard of theirs, the ancient orchard, the old orchard. Three ancient apple trees dance in the midday breeze, sweeping over the lawn, and lift their summer skirts to show us silver linings. Three green graces, long limbs sculpted by seasons of country time, joined in a circle, offering their lovely shapes and still lush tresses and centuries of fruitfulness. Well, a toast to that and my old friend. I had earlier a glass of wine. It happened to come from Chile, speaking of Chile, in honor of Neruda and the forest, and it was called dancing juice. So maybe that's adding a little dancing to me tonight, and you for us. Here's another on how the earth communicates to us, with us, if we're listening and if we're responding. And we can listen and respond. We can do it even more often and more deeply than you imagine. And the more you do it, I find anyway, the more you want to do it. You want to listen and you want to respond. Call and response from the earth. The Speaking World is the title. The recitations of the ocean's breaking waves. The hymns rising from the green hearts of forests. The narrations of rivers. Rhapsodies of valleys, prairies, the whispers passing between clouds and mountain tops, the soliloquies of the deserts, colloquies of blooming gardens, the paeans chorusing through the canopies of rampant jungles, the shared poetries of the moon, stars, and midnight wind, all the sensuously shaped and deeply throated voices of the speaking world, that sing through the air, that seek out listening ears. Well, that was inspired by the Neruda poem about singing through the world. That's what at least I, and some other poets like to do. We like to sing through the world in our way with our hearts, minds, spirits, souls. Here's a poem on the feeling states that the earth, that nature can evoke in us. I'm sure is evoked in some of you and may well evoke in even more amazing ways going forward in time. Wendy Berry, Elegy it's called. All day our eyes could find no resting place. Over a flood of snow sight came back, empty to the mind. The sun in a shudder of clouds, light staggered down the fall of snow. All circling surfaces of earth were white. No shape or shadow moved the flight of winter birds. Snow held earth its silence, We could pick no birdsong from the wind. At nightfall our father turned his eyes away. It was this storm of silence shook out his ghost. We sleep. He only wakes, who is unshapen in a night of snow. His shadow in the shadow of the earth moves the dark to wholeness. We watch beside his body here, his image, shape of silence in the room. Sifting down the wind, the winter rain spirals about the town, and the church's hills jut of stone. Well, thank you, Wendy Berry. Many of you would know by heart or know of Robert Frost's famous poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. I thought it'd be nice to honor him tonight, and apropos of our theme. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near between the woods and frozen lake the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and a downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Robert Frost. So as we go through, let's keep inviting and tending active and deeper felt connection with the earth and its consciousness and its elemental energies. And this may fit that mode. It's a Rhinocerosmaria Rilke poem from the Ninth Elegy. Why, if it could begin as laurel and be spent so, this space of being, a little darker than all the surrounding green, with little waves at the edge of every leaf like a breeze's smile, why then have to be human, and shunning destiny long for destiny? Oh, not because happiness exists, that over-hasty profit from imminent loss, not out of curiosity or to practice the heart, which could exist in the laurel, but because being here is much, and because all that's here seems to need us, the ephemeral, that strangely concerns us. We, the most ephemeral, one for each thing, only once and no more, and we too once, never again. But this once to have been, though only once, to have been an earthly thing, seems irrevocable. Earth, is it not this that you want, to rise invisibly in us? Is that not your dream, to be invisible one day? Earth, invisible. What is your urgent command, if not transformation? Earth, beloved, I will. Oh, believe me, you need no more springtimes to win me. Only one, one, is already more than my blood can stand. Namelessly, I have been truly yours, from the first. You were always right, and your most sacred inspiration is that familiar death. See, I live. On what? Neither childhood nor future grows less. Excess of being wells up in my heart. Thank you, Rilke. Well, that brought to mind this poem of mine about the painter Gustav Klimt. This was written for a very wonderful spirit brother of the past of Jasper Krabbe in Amsterdam. And it was a New York opening that he had, and it was a painting of the painter Klimt that I was very moved by. Klimt in his garden. He moves in a moon-length robe through an evening green garden of quietude, with hidden feet that touch the muted grass and moss, his figure almost afloat under the first blooms, faint and soon fragrant on the branches over his silent head and soft beard, without thought of brushes or canvases, only this moment savoring the poetry of a spring night in his garden. It's a poem that arose in me one summer a few years back, and how much we can drink in of the earth. It's called Can You Taste the Green? On the tongue of your nose, the greens of a northeast summer, sultry summer day, the scents of sweet grasses, languid trees, and curling vines, fanning fronds and sunning fields, all lushing, infusing the air as you slowly move, taste, breathe through their sensuously redolent aromas. Sometimes I spelunk around the sites like the Poetry Foundation when I'm looking for some favorite poets and themed poems that fit our themes. Various weeks that we do these, and I was looking at this, and since we're talking about nature and ecology and earth, there was a little note here about poetic approaches to the natural world, or recent ones, and ecology, poetry and the environment. Let's give you this opening part. The romantic poets, often writing about beautiful rural landscapes as a source of joy, made nature poetry a popular poetic genre. When writing environmental poems today, contemporary poets tend to write about nature more broadly than their predecessors, focusing more on the negative effects of human activity on the planet. Critic J. Parini explained in his introduction to Poems for a Small Planet, nature is no longer the rustic retreat of the Wordsworthian poet. It is now a pressing political question, a question of survival. Distinct from nature poetry, environmental poetry explores the complicated connections between people and nature, often written by poets who are concerned about our impact on the natural world. Poets today are serving as witnesses to climate change while bringing attention to important environmental issues and advocating for preservation and conservation. And I applaud them, and I think in some ways I get toward that, but some of them are much more vocal, more strident about it. I'm a little gentler, and I still think there's room to bring the gentler side, to underscore the beauty and other connections. Although I'm going to talk a little bit about and on their wavelength a little bit here. In fact, right now with the book The Hour of Land, Terry Tempest Williams, in her book, explores the responsibility of awe in the wilderness as an antidote to the war within ourselves. She said, awe is the moment when ego surrenders to wonder. She echoes, in a way, Walt Whitman's stirring meditation on what makes life worth living. And he had said, or had asked, after you've exhausted what there is in business, politics, conviviality, love, and so on, have found that none of these finally satisfy or permanently wear, what remains? He answered simply, nature remains. So true. So Terry Tempest Williams, no matter how much we try to manage and manipulate, orchestrate, or regulate out our national parks, they will remain as the edgescapes they are, existing on the boundaries between culture and wildness, improvisational spaces immune to the scripts of anyone. Wildlife in wild lands appear without notice. Awakened is what we become in their presence. Curiosity leads us forward on an unknown path, even if it is a path of well-placed steps made out of pink granite here in Acadia. For a precious moment, we touch and taste life uninterrupted. Awe sneaks up on us like love. We surrender to the ecstatic outpouring of life before us. She also said this, what we mistake as sentimental is in fact a generosity, a willingness to stay open and acknowledge the miraculous. Cynicism flourishes in air-conditioned rooms. Like any true place, the desert is a risk. Back into a barrel cactus and you may get hurt, but touch its yellow flowers with petals like wax and the pain from its needles lessens. Our fear of being touched removes us from a sensate world. The distant self becomes the detached self who no longer believes in anything. Awe is the moment when ego surrenders to wonder. This is our inheritance, the beauty before us. We cry out. There is nothing sentimental about facing the desert bare. It is a terrifying beauty. Thank you, Terry Tempest Williams. I think often about the sacredness of the earth, small s, but large in the feeling. Hence the the intuition I have to be reverent with it always, in small and large ways. And this was an ode to the Autumnal Equinox. It was written above the Hudson River, New York City, September of 2012. Eternal rhythms. The sun moves south in a bright cross over the equator, over great rainforests, hunting tigers, hidden tribes. Horus entwines with Seth, Gwyn with Gwythyr, the Holly King with the Oak King. Light balances with darkness, night with day. Still warm land yields its last best fruits for harvest, while wicker men made of barley stems are set afire, while sacred corn, black, white, yellow, red, is ground and watered to life, while 7 looming faces made of stone look solemnly out to sea, gaze Easter Islandly into sunset. A feathered serpent triangled with light, Father, Mother, Son, descends an unshaded pyramid. Mystics, too, descend within themselves to discover. Spirit enters waiting bodies, and at midnight Alcyone arrives and aligns incandescently from the Pleiades, and the earth, the whole earth, turns again to its eternal rhymes and rhythms. Well, speaking of the eternal, here's a poem. The animating music of birds. This is called The Birds Have Sung their notes faithfully, mellifluously, for thousands of years. Nightingales to orioles, robins to wrens, into the ears and hearts of ancient Greeks and Mayans, emperors and farmers, explorers and lovers, across a world of forests and fields, marshes, mountains, ocean sides, outbacks, still wondrously, joyously singing. John Muir once more. The scenery of the ocean, he said, however sublime and vast expanse, seems far less beautiful to us dry-shod animals of the land than that of the land, seen only in comparatively small patches. But when we contemplate the whole globe as one great dewdrop, striped and dotted with continents and islands, flying through space with other stars, all singing and shining together as one, the whole universe appears as an infinite storm of beauty. How about that? Well, on that same note, how the microcosm reveals the macrocosm, the great wholeness. This is called In a Drop. This is my poem. In a drop of salt water, you can see an ocean bluing. Of rain, you can hear blossoms opening. Of wine, you can taste a landscape sunning. Of quicksilver, you can scent weather coming. Of ink, you can touch a poet dreaming. Of a tear, you can feel your being flowing. The poet Joy Harjo enjoins me in telling us to, offering us to remember. She said, remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away to night. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life, and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them. Listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember language comes from this. Remember the dance language is, that life is. Remember. Let me give you an invitation to engage more intimately, like she's doing, more consciously and gladly and gently. Kiss the earth is this poem. Kiss the earth with your feet, the sky with your eyes, the sea with your ears, your life with your softly parted heart. And one more invitation of a fitting kind around the spring. Planting yourself is the title. In the earth, in your breath, in the morning light, in your heart. Each day a place, a chance to break new ground, root, grow, flower. All right, coming into the last stretch now. The passionate American ecologist William Vogt, 1902 to 1968, who wrote shortly before Rachel Carson penned her prescient open letter to America, insisting that, quote, the real wealth of the nation lies in the resources of the earth, soil, water, forest, minerals, and wildlife. He called for long-term thinking. He said, we must, all of us, men, women, and children, reorient ourselves with relation to the world in which we live. We must come to understand our past, our history, in terms of the soil and water and forests and grasses that have made it what it is. We must see the years to come in the frame that makes space and time one. Terry Tempest Williams one more time. How do we find our way back to a world interrelated and interconnected whose priority is to thrive and evolve? What kind of belief systems are emerging now that reinforce and contribute to a world increasingly disconnected from nature? And what about the belief, my belief, in all that is wild? I return to the wilderness to remember what I have forgotten, that the world can be wholesome and beautiful, that the harmony and integrity of ecosystems at peace is a mirror to what we have lost. We are at a crossroads. We can continue on the path we have been on in this nation that privileges profit over people and land, or we can unite as citizens with a common cause, the health and wealth of the earth that sustains us. If we cannot commit to this kind of fundamental shift in our relationship to people and place, then democracy becomes another myth perpetuated by those in power who care only about themselves. The time has come for acts of reverence and restraint on behalf of the earth. We have arrived at the hour of land. So I say, a quiet urging, feel the earth. Slow down, all the way down. Feel the earth, the sentient earth. See and touch it, hear it, taste it, where you are, wherever you are. Let it hold you. Let it feel you. Let it breathe you. Let it fill you. From the 2019 spring equinox, since we're in spring here, a synchronizing with our planet, our home, and a deeper grounding, let us call it. This is this poem, Serenely Centered. You're floating straight up above a field or an ocean, a forest or mountain. Your limbs are loose, your gaze is soft. A warm breeze plays on your skin. Centered over your head is a great sun. Below your soul's a great moon. The three of you floating together, balanced weightlessly, cradled gently in space and the open sky. Your three bodies, a trinity of light and lightness, serenely centered with the earth, the fertile earth, your home, your breathing and birthing place, being and becoming place that turns itself now slowly, now surely again to flower at your feet. Last for now, let's close with this poem of mine, a prayer of a kind, you might say or feel. I've read it once before for another occasion, but I think it's a nice way for us to end, and a fitting way for us to end our staying in touch with the earth theme. Give us this day. Give us this day our daily wind, to fill our sails, ruffle our curtains, caress our faces. Give us this day our daily sun, to light our way, warm our mornings, color our day's endings. Give us this day our daily sea, to voyage on, gather our fish from, refresh our bodies in. This new day of simply living on the earth, of breathing in this earth and all its givings. Give us this day to openly, gladly receive these gifts. Thank you again for listening in, floating and feeling in. My always thanks as well to everyone contributing to support these programs and my poetic arts, devoted as they are to nourishing spirits, uplifting hearts, and sparking greater awareness and aliveness. You can donate any amount by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site or by regular mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. I also invite patrons to bring me their way for a month or longer this summer or fall as a private poet in residence on their property to create a new flight of work to share with and dedicate to them. And collaborators of various kinds, musical to theatrical, cinematical to exhibitional, to reach out to explore a pairing of artistic spirits with, of artistic harmonies and possibilities. I do love hearing from listeners, so I hope you'll continue to send along comments, questions, suggestions. Email colin@thepoetorialist.com. Remember, replays are online for you to revisit or share. You can also subscribe very simply to the weekly broadcasts. I hope you'll lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to staying in touch, deepening and expanding and appreciating your intimacy with the earth. And as always, good spirits.